Good morning, everyone. It is so good to have you all here on this very important session today to discuss the filling in of canals to restore the wetlands and sacred spaces. My name is Reverend Gregory T. Manning. I'm the chair of the Greater New Orleans Interfaith Climate Coalition, an organization, a coalition rather, that I founded about 2 years ago now. I have the privilege of working most regularly with our steering committee that works to put on programs such as these. It meets on a bi-monthly basis. We can conduct the business of the Greater New Orleans Interfaith Climate Coalition. We're made up of several teams. One is our legislative team, another is our missions and affiliation team, and also our Greening the Church team. We believe that the earth is a sacred place. We believe that those who inhabit the earth are sacred beings. And we believe that we are charged with the responsibility of both caring for the earth and caring for one another. And so we encourage that. We move on action in order to ensure that that happens. Today, we are very excited to hear this presentation, to hear about a way in which we can all take action and be aware of how we can move to ensure that we maintain the honoring of sacred spaces. And so, again, welcome to everyone. If you want to know more about the Greater New Orleans Interfaith Climate Coalition, you can go to gnoicc.org. That's gnoicc.org. You can read more about us, and we hope that you will consider joining us in our effort to ensure that we care for the earth and care for those who have been given the awesome privilege of inhabiting the earth at this time. I want to just begin with a brief word of prayer. Can we just take a moment, if you would, and if you're able to mute your phone to keep down on any distractions. Let's take a moment to pause and to just ground ourselves in the knowledge and the understanding that we have been given a great privilege to be able to do life together at this time, that we have been given the great charge to care for one another in this earth. God, we ask now that you would give us awareness of all things around us, that we would gain an appreciation for all that is a blessing upon this earth, every animal, every tree, every flower, all of the air that we breathe each day. God, we give you thanks. And God, we ask now that you would give us a mind that receives all that is said today, that it would be translated into action that we are motivated to take. And so now, God, we thank you for those who have been also share in the same passion to be able to be on this meeting on today. And we ask all of this in the name of my Savior, Jesus. Amen. I'd like to now turn it over to the chair of our missions and affiliations team, Reverend Christina Peterson.
Hi. Thank you so very, very much, Reverend Manning. And it's been an absolute privilege to be part of this organization that you're leading. And I welcome everybody here today. What you're going to be hearing today is a coming together of many prayers, much work from many people. And I'd like to introduce the team right now before we turn it over to Jean. Many years ago, when I first met Rosina Philippe at the Grand Bayou Takpa Ishtahquasha tribe in Lower Plaquemines, they showed me an issue of land loss with canals being cut back and forth through their precious land. And they said, you know, it would be so wonderful if we could just fill these. And so through many years and many different ways of imagination, these ideas have been presented. And through the partnership of the First Peoples Conservation Council, which Rosina Philippe is the president, and she's on the call. So I hope you wave Rosina, if you can wave your wave to the folks. And then also Elder Teresa Dardar, who is the president of Lowlander Center, who is part of the Portashan Indian tribe. And then also Chief Sherelle Parfait Dardar of the Grand Caillou Dulac tribe. And all of them have been working diligently with such groups as GOMA, who Christine Mormon is on the line right now, and also with folks like Mira Olson from Drexel, who's on the line and part of this group right now, and Kayla Morgan, who is one of the students from Drexel and is working with us, and our old friend, I shouldn't say old friend because she's young, but she's a dear friend, Julie Maldonado, who is part of the team. So all of these players have come together, and in the connection that Dr. Shirley Laska had with Gene Turner from many years back, and then a reacquaintance that began with our partnership with the Barataria Terrebonne National Estuary, all of these people and forces came together so that we could pursue this goal of getting canals restored so that land and the people around the land could be protected. And so with that, let me introduce Dr. Gene Turner, who comes to this not just as a professor from LSU from the, in quotes, hard sciences, but comes to this from a heart that is filled with the love of creation and his strong foundational faith in with the Unitarian Universalist. So Gene, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you for allowing me to make a presentation to you, to be before you. And if you have any questions in the middle of it, I don't have a chat box immediately in front of it, so just speak up. I'd be glad to try to clarify or admit confusion on the way. So
that's great. And Gene, I will monitor the chat for you and let you know if there's anything posted there.
Okay, good. If the way I've understood it, what I'm going to do, it always changes in the middle sometimes, is that I'll go through the canals being dredged along the coast and a way to fill them in, and why we're doing it at this particular time, starting off with the Lowlander Center. So let's get going on this. Oh, maybe I can't. Let's see, there we go. So by canals, what I'm talking about are dredged waterways. They're in Europe, of course. There are other places that have been in the Mayans. And in our case, this is a picture of the intercoastal waterway with a barge being pushed through. It used to be about a third of that size wide. There's a dredged waterway up to the right. I think I have a pointer. Yes, up here. There's a oil well here and an oil well down there, and I'll show you plenty of examples of this. And there's one coming over here as well into the dredged waterway. And that material that's dredged out of there goes up on the side, and I'll show you some pictures of that. So here's one network of different canals, all dug independently. There's an oil well back here. There's one over here. There's one there. There's one here, over there. They were all dug independently with each with their own permit. And this is how they look. One of them looks when it's being dredged, is that it's got a well. Well, it's just after it's been dredged, so it has a lot. And this one is a pretty sloppy area already. So the mud is lined up on the side, and it's gone away quickly because this is a very soft soil. In this particular case, I'll show you ones where it isn't. And the drill rig is right there, of course, with the pipe going down at the end of that tower. It's a little wider at the end because the service boats that come in periodically to take care of the well problems or add things, they need a little wider turning area around so they can go back out again. So it's a little wider at the end, and that's called the keyhole. And this is a case comparing how one of these oil wells compared to a natural channel, this is a pretty wide natural channel and has a little levee on the side of it that shows up as a different color because it's got more vegetation on it. This is this dredge material that's put off to the side on the spoil bank over here with the oil well in there. That has a little wetland loss on the side, which is why it's a lighter blue, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what can be seen on this is that this is a constant linear channel levee all the way up and further away on the top, compared to a very thin natural levee here. And this levee here is as wide as the canal is on both sides. So the levee itself is formed by the material dredged up from this channel. It's fairly linear. Nature is not linear. And it's a straight channel because they only really want to know where the mineral is beneath to get to it down here.
Say, Gene, we did get a question in the chat, which I'd like to read to you from Jonathan Leo. How many are the reasons that waterways are dredged? Must a canal always be created in order to place and drill an oil well, or are they made for other reasons?
I would say that 99% of them, more than that, are due for oil and gas recovery beneath. I'll show you an example of where they are and how many have been abandoned in a little bit. If you look at the natural levee one, you can see the little nicks on the side. For some reason, there are little nicks over here. The little channels coming through the levee, going back and forth, like over here as well. And those are natural. Those are where the water moves in and out. This is a wetland. Whereas with the spoil bank, it can't go across it. It has to go water has to come in, go all the way around it to get to over here, instead of coming in through all these little nicks. So to give you an example of how many there can be at sometimes, each of these yellow dots have an oil well on them. They're all independently dredged. There's a derrick, something off to the side here and waiting to do another one. And it's a pretty dense network. And sooner or later, you find these little water ponds forming in between where levees are bound. And I'll come back to that shortly.
Gene, we had another question from in the chat from Peter Diggory. Are the current and abandoned oil wells checked for methane releases? Is there any data on that?
They should be. And we know they're leaky, and not all the seals are complete. And of course, some of these were done in 1900, so you can imagine how well the maintenance has been done on those, because they're basically they should be checked. Like everything, ourselves included, bridges, roadways, they always need to be repaired, and there's always weak spots that we didn't intend to find. These are the oil and gas wells around New Orleans as of 1901 to 1920, which is at the top here. So I'm going to show you almost a 20-year history intervals going through there. And the little pink dots on there are where the wells. See, like there's one right here and there's one right down there. So by 1920 to 1940, they're often clustered together because there's an oil sometimes is there it's always there for a geological reason, but sometimes it's independent and sometimes they're clustered together. This is from 1940 to 1960. And you can see a lot more of them. And of course, there's some in open water and there's some in the wetlands, but a lot of them are in the wetlands. And this is only for New Orleans. if you compare those two slides, you can see obviously at the end of World War II, the exploration and then the drilling went way up again. And and now from 19 to 1980, it's really high. And those are all individual dots for individual wells have gone up. And the last, yes, here's the last one. This goes up to 2007. They're everywhere. I was in California at Livermore, and I looked off in the horizon, and I couldn't figure out what was out there. And there was just one well out there, but it was camouflaged because people were not happy with being able to see oil and gas out on the just offshore. And I can't imagine camouflaging all these. There's thousands of them. So, and as a result from that, there are spoil banks on the other side, and this is just for Barataria Bay. The straight lines are all spoil banks that we could tell at the time on the map. This is in 2001 that have been formed from dredging those canals. And of course, there's no spoil banks in open water because they don't need them to deepen the channel so the boat can come in. It's already deep enough. So how many canals are there? Well, for the 14 coastal parishes up to 2017, I went through all the DNR permits. There's 76,000 permits across the coast. 35 of those, about half, were on wetlands, basically, on coastal lands in those 14 parishes. And of those 35,000 on coastal land, 27,000 were officially abandoned. And the way you could tell that is because the logs at DNR say they were plugged or they use the word abandoned. So there's no doubt that these are no longer being used. So the majority, three quarters are not being used anymore, but they're still there, of course. So how many miles of that is in canals? That's 10,000 miles. That's 20,000 miles of spoil bank because there's one on either side. And to scale that, 20,000 miles, that's enough to cross Louisiana 79 times. It's enough to go to Switzerland and back twice. The distance around the equator is 24,000 miles. So this is 24,000 miles. So this is 20,000 miles of spoil bank, which is an enormous change to wetlands. Now, they're not obviously equally distributed, but that water really has a tough time going from, and these are wetlands, so they require that water to come in and out, sometimes twice a day, but usually once a day. So here's what a marsh pictorially looks like before dredging. I'll go through a sequence below ground of what it looks like to dredge a canal. And I'm going to show you, I think, a little spacing about that brown area on the top, which represents the marsh peat above the mineral lighter brown material below. So we're in a salt marsh here. And the food.
Well, how come there aren't any plants there?
And we clipped it.
The top layer to get the sediment? All right.
We clipped it. We're going to take core of that brown, dark brown layer. And this is not this is a student from Iowa, and that's the first time he's ever done that. And we take a core, and we're going to fill out. And you see, he's walking on this stuff. It isn't something you're going to sink into. And then we're going to slip the mud out. And I'm going to ask
what's all this in here?
What is all that?
At the bottom, these white things are the rhizomes. Smaller ones are like down here. Yeah, look at that. It's a live plant, 3 feet deep. Wow. 10 inches, 10 centimeters.
He's going to slice it open. You can see what it looks like.
Kind of looks like a hot dog.
And that's
Is this a Louisiana hot dog?
Slice that open.
Oh, what are you doing there? Slicing open the inside of the core. Oh, what's all that fiber stuff? What's all that?
root mass.
It's fine right here. Is that dead?
The white stuff is alive.
Is that part of the plant too? And like, what's this coming out the bottom? Rhizome, you call it? What's that for?
Well,
So he's saying it's a rhizome. I'm doing this because they wanted to learn about the marsh during the oil spill. And the rhizome is like a potato, only in this case it's a salt marsh plant. And that's basically not composed of very much mineral matter at all. It's root mass. That's why you can walk on it. It's firm because of all those roots down there. The mineral matter might be only 1 or 2, well, in this place, 1 or 2 or 3% organic mineral matter, and the rest of it is all formed because of that live plant. And it goes down deeper than 3 feet. And so it's a living system on the top. And how you damage a marsh? Well, you damage that living system and it turns to open water. And all those little fine roots there provide tension for the soil to be held together. Those larger white roots off to the left over here, those sometimes curl back up and they form new plants at the surface. They are long-term storage organs. So when you dredge it, you cut through that layer and you go even deeper and you put the stuff on the side that comes up. So you have an inverse pyramid basically with the mineral matter on top once you finish. And it's stacked, it's about 60 feet wide, sometimes 90 feet wide, and about 12 or 15 feet deep. So that's much deeper than the natural drainage systems, and it becomes a very efficient way of moving water in and out of the whole coastal zone. And after 1 year of dredging, a canal looks something like this, which is that the canal width hasn't changed, but the spoil bank may have sunk a little bit and spread out a little wider. And then at the end, the spoil bank is pushed down and compressed the area beneath it. And the canal is now wider. It's higher. Its height has gotten a little lower. It's sunk down. And you can dig down through a canal, which we do now and then. You can find the old root layer down there laying on the side. It's perfectly preserved. And the height of the spoil bank could be 8 to 15 feet high, and the tides are only a foot at most. So water can't get over it above because it's too high. It has to go around it, and it can't go below because the tide doesn't go that low. And about half the water normally goes in and out of the marsh through below ground. So now both those ways, above and below, are cut off. The other thing is that ponding sometimes appears on the side, and the surface layer out to about 150 meters, which is say 400 feet, the elevation drops. It drops more if there's mineral matter there. It doesn't drop as much if there's oil and gas beneath. It drops more if enough is removed, and that's called subsidence. But in any case, the ponding by itself and the height of the spoil bank restricts water movement, and that happens regardless whether it's a dry well or a producing well.
So Jim,
yes.
We had a question from the chat about what it means to be officially abandoned for a well. Is that something you're going to address in a minute, or can I go ahead and ask that question now?
Well, you did, and that's a good question. There's a legal definition, and I'm not a lawyer. And I know sometimes they're not officially, it used to be, and I don't know if the law has changed. It used to be that if you didn't officially declare it abandoned, it was not legally abandoned, even though it's identified as that. And that means that somebody doesn't have to pay to go restore it. I don't quite have clarity on that point. I would, if you declare it abandoned officially, then there may be consequences, is what I'm saying. And these things aren't that expensive to do, but it does have a consequence, that difference.
Would the abandoned wells be filled in with concrete or otherwise capped? And
Yes, they would. Sometimes a double. There are rules about that going back 50, well, quite a few years, at least 50 years, saying more than that. They have to have put a cement seal in it. They may have to do it twice. There's 3-year pipes usually, I think, to go down, and they have to be basically left in place so nothing leaks up to the top. Of course, that doesn't always happen, as we know.
And the final part of this question is, regardless of the method of sealing, do you know what percentage of abandoned wells are probably leaking methane?
I don't know the methane leakage at all, but people have done this in other places. In Pennsylvania, I know of one, and they leak quite a bit in Pennsylvania. So, but they're not in marshes. So I don't. And of course, these wells are recovering oil or gas or both. Thousands of feet below ground. They could go down to 17,000 feet with it, but they don't always do that. And so here's a network I'll go through with the light areas are the old distributary river courses that have bifurcated, and it's got canals laying on top of it. So here's the old, in blue, excuse me, in blue, the old the old natural drainage features, and waters went north to south, basically, for the most part, in and out. But if you add canals to it, they can't do that. And so all those dark areas in there, not all of them, there's a few up here that aren't, but these areas up here, they form ponds because water can't get out as fast. Once it gets in there, it doesn't get in there very easily. It has very few places to get in there. But once it does, it can't get out. And it'd be like watering your lawn all week, or your plant at home. It'll eventually kill the plant. All this area over here is broken up. All these dark spots over here used to be marsh. So how do spoil banks cause land loss? Just as a summary, you get water exchange interrupted above and below ground. And so you have water can't get in as quickly, so you have longer drying cycles. But when it gets in, you have longer flooding cycles. So the drying oxidizes the soil, the flooding stresses the plant. So you lose organic matter, just like in the Orleans Way, a lot of it's below sea level. It's been dried out and the organic matter has decayed and becomes CO2 when you get, that's soil oxidation basically. Impoundments form because of the interacting canals, and you form ponds in between them. And all this, if there's a marsh left, it weakens the soil. Yeah, if there's a marsh left, you can weaken it other ways, but one of the ways is it just doesn't have the fibrous network. And that's when you start sinking in, and that's when the marsh falls apart during a hurricane, after a hurricane, and that's what did happen after Carnarvon. So here's an example. I won't show too many graphs, but here's 1950 to 1990, and a canal went in when it was 15% open water, and right afterwards it went up to 85% open water. And the area we're talking about is surrounded here, and there's the canal. And it went from here over to here, and that's because there was an oyster bed down below here, and at the time they didn't want to dredge through oyster beds, and the marsh was worthless, so they just dredged a very long canal across it. So that canal is dredged. Open water formed over here at these other sites. Before that, it was all marsh altogether. In Barataria, we have these for several places, but if you looked at from the 60s to the little after 2000, you look at the percent area, and we looked at the canal area here going up from down here up. Dredging stopped. We didn't have any more. There's actually some of it restored, and then dredging started again and went up, and then it stopped, and we have land loss working as just in the same way. In fact, when your canal area was a little lower because for whatever reason, the open water actually stopped becoming more open water. It just didn't lose as much. And so that's one example. Sorry. And if you look at when the permits for these canals happened, about 30% of the canals were in the late 50s and early 60s. So this is annual permits for all those 14 parishes. There were a few in 1900, but basically it started in 1920, and now it's back to almost zero, but there still is some activity, and it goes up and down a little bit during the years. And if you overlay on top of that land loss, using these maps that were done by the Corps of Engineers, it's right on top of it. It just lags it a little bit. And the implication is that obviously that the creation of all these spoil banks and canals was directly related to land loss. There is another way of looking at land loss through the USGS, and actually land loss at the moment is, statistically speaking, it's zero. So, but I'm sure that's going to change with more sea level rise. If you looked at land loss in these squares, which are over here in the deltaic plain, I'm going to exclude these areas that are really fragmented already. That includes the delta, a little section over here, some of it over here. It doesn't have, it has about 25% marsh, and so they erode a lot faster. But if you look at all those other squares that are pretty much dominated by marsh, it's, for given the changes in geography and geology across the coast, it's a straight line. So that here's land loss going up, you have a lot of canals. When land loss is almost zero, you have basically no land loss. And you've got a lot of varieties of geologies going across there. There's other reasons to lose land loss, like the intercoastal waterway. But it kind of tells you the causes of land loss, at least it does to me. So I could say we have some options on this, and one of them is to ignore these relationships, and they're pretty well documented over the years. And there's lots of really comments comparing this to coal mining, taking the top off of mountains in Tennessee and so forth. So we have management options, which is to ignore this or not. There's an admitted or a recognition, at least by the oil and gas companies, that 30%, and you occasionally hear it higher by individuals in the companies, that has caused land loss higher than 30%. And obviously what I'm showing you is that it's above 90%. So the question is, can it be reversed? Not should it be reversed, should something be done, but can it be? And I would say that partially it could be, but the sea level rise is going to change things if it doesn't get stopped pretty quickly, because there are limits to how much flooding the plants can take. So let's see so these are the wells that I spoke of 27,000 wells across the coast. There's no shortage of sites to go to at any location. They could all be, something could be restored for them within the parishes. Excuse me. And one way to restore it is what we've done, what the state tried for 33 of them in the 1980s, which was to just pull that spoil bank with the dredge right back down into the canal. Immediately, and of course these are big dredges, so it's not exactly a delicate instrument. But the marsh and the spoil bank forms right away. But the canal is not completely filled in, and I'll show you lots of examples. So here's a case where the upper half was backfilled, they call it. That means filling it back in. They just dragged the spoil bank back in recently, and it's got a former canal in here, and you can compare it to the area with the spoil bank over here, which has not been backfilled. So that's one way to start the restoration process. Eventually, well, and here's something that ConocoPhillips did with Ducks Unlimited just after they finished dragging it down. There's a little vegetation left at the edge. The dredge is the same dredge they dredged it with, or in same style of dredge. It can reach only so far, so sometimes you have to go out with a bulldozer and pull it back in. Some people, the Park Service has several of these as well. I'll show you. Some of them don't recover. The white line is the former area of the spoil bank, and you can see it's pretty much the way it was. And this one is a different one, and there's the old spoil bank outline, and the pond is only at the end where it was a little wider at the keyhole. Here's one that, two of them that responded really well, in which case it's just a natural channel coming in now. And in this case, you can hardly tell that there's a natural channel. That's the only thing left of the canal. The rest of it is filled in from dragging it down. Then naturally some sediments come in during storms. And if you put a plug at the end, it does much better at that. And here's one from 10 years apart. And here's it after, this is the former spoil bank. And this is 10 years later. You can see the channel has filled in. If you compare this channel to that channel, it's filled in a good ways. And these 33 canals were done as an opportunity arose. It didn't happen because they systematically went through and said, oh, we ought to backfill this one, we ought to do that one, and compare them and all that. These were not done in a way, they were done because it was an opportunity. This is one we did at Jean Lafitte Park, and this is just after and just before the canal. Before, they had lots of tallow trees and others on the side banks, and just afterwards they're all gone and it's starting to fill in on its own. And here it is before, the top one on the left, and after on the right in 1980. And this is something done in 2002. And here's one below that was done. We didn't fill this canal in with extra sediment on the bottom. We did on the top. There's a little plug at the end, and the plugs help enormously to speed up the restoration of the canals. But the canal itself still may take several decades to get in, and you have to be careful about anticipating expectations, because if they're surrounded by a whole lot of other canals, it won't do as much good. You have to work at it as a system of getting water in and out. And they're filled in with organic matter for the most part, not with sediment. So how much would it cost? Well, based on the Park Service work, we know the cost of that's a hectare is 2.5 acres. Roughly, you could fill in all the abandoned canals for the whole coast for $335 million. That's less than 1% of the $50 billion restoration plan and the master plan. It has, if you search the master plan, you won't find any the word canal unless it's used as a geographic identifier. It's pretty much left out of it. It's allowed, though, I'm told, because they did send a letter in for this effort we're doing with a lowlander, through the lowlander. So if you just had $3.5 million, you could do 260 canals, which is 60 times more than already have been backfilled across the coast. It's just a really inexpensive way of restoring things, but it will take some time. It won't take 50 years. It may take 50 years. It could happen very quickly. And the national park at Jean Lafitte has a general permit to fill in all their canals. They're just waiting on the money, which they've gotten a big hunk from the restore the BP oil spill money that came through. They've applied for it, and they're filling in, I think, almost all the canals there now. So the last couple slides are just what are we doing here? There are a few of you might know of these two mounds at LSU, which were built basket by Indians. They're maybe 30 feet high here, and they're now protected just with a little rim of a wall around it, because sometimes people drove a Jeep up there, or they had picnics on top. The ones you might be familiar with at Cahokia in Illinois or Poverty Point, these were the huge ones. They're large, our interpretation of what their uses are slowly being uncovered, but we weren't there, so we don't know all the uses, but they were dug with a purpose, obviously. They were, at the time, Cahokia was holding about 4,000 people is the estimate. Oh, more than that. Actually, it was larger than most cities in Europe at the time when the colonialists came over. So what we are trying to do is around these sites that exist, and I don't want to say anything about where they are, mostly because I don't know where they are, but amateur archaeologists sometimes go out there and damage the sites, which is not something to do. And we're trying to restore the sites that are in South Louisiana, and I know where some of them are on the West Bank, and I've been to ones in the Gulf of Mexico in Mexico at directly south in New Orleans that it looked to be about 100 feet tall, and they're all over the place. And there's a book called they're well known, and they sometimes had weirs between them where they trap fish. You go about, and these also exist in South Louisiana, and the tribes are interested in protecting them because the land around them is eroding them on the edges. It's going to erode them in a while. And so there's a cultural reason and there's a physical reason for the whole coast to restore these backfill canals. And what we're doing with the Lowlander Center is to develop the permits to do that. The missing link so far is that we're going to need the landowner permission to do that, because that's the way the privacy laws work on ownership. It's not in the legal system. It's held by individuals or corporations that may own 600,000 acres of land, by the way. So that's where we are, and that's the project. And they're just wonderful. I can't say enough about them. And they're living off the wetlands, of course. And there's a saying, no wetlands, no seafood. And that is their livelihood. So with that, I think I'll stop. I'd be glad to go back to anything. Yep, I said I'd be about that long.
Great. I have a question via text from Pastor Manning. Or perhaps, Pastor Manning, if you'd like to unmute, you could just ask yourself.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Gene. That's just a wonderful presentation. I've learned so much. I'm wondering if there's any legislation that's being proposed to hold the oil industry accountable for all these abandoned wells.
Well, the levee board at New Orleans tried to start that process, and it was stopped. And there are, through the legislature, it was Governor Jindal was there at the time. There are some lawsuits here and there, individual ones, but a systematic, coastwide legal remedy has not been done. There are a few lawsuits in parishes that are trying to do exactly that, because some permits that I have seen and some of the authorizations I have seen, and I'm not an attorney, have said they will abandon them. If they abandon them, they will be filled back in. And of course, that's been basically not done. When you only do 40 or 60 of them for the large tens of thousands we have, it's being ignored. So no.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Gene. I'm also getting several questions from chat. One from Jonathan Leo about a draft EIS. Jonathan, would you like to ask that?
Sure. Thank you, Bart. And Gene, thank you very, very much for this. I'm a California environmental lawyer, and I'm learning a lot really fast about southern Louisiana. This has been very helpful for me. I read recently about a draft environmental impact statement that is or will be shortly released, I believe, by the Army Corps of Engineers regarding restoration of a large part of Barataria Bay. Are you familiar with this, and how does that, to the extent you're familiar with it, play into the kind of wetlands restoration that you've been describing with these slides?
Well, I think you're referring to a large diversion of the river.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
I haven't seen it is supposed to be released in March. That's it's intended to bring sediment that's in the river upstream out into these marshes and build up the land close to where it's diverted. It's called a diversion. There are other considerations of that. There are people that don't want that to happen. And because it has a conflict with the sediment that builds up is mostly sand. That's the land building material. It's building up close to where it's diverted, right next to the river. Whereas the water goes further out, and the Corps of Engineers had a model that showed that the water would rise a half meter, certainly 20 centimeters, almost a
hear you more. It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant.
Sorry, folks.
Sorry. The water going in there is going to flood the marshes almost throughout Barataria Bay, which will be a stress on all the wetland systems within the bay. And it also will bring nutrients. And the problem with nutrients, particularly phosphorus, is that if the plants have a ready supply of nutrients, then they don't put out as many roots, and it also decomposes the soil. So the far field is damaged, whereas the near field will be built up with sediments. And then another point is that most of the sediments are actually trapped in the river and the channel on their way down. And so what happens is what you divert upstream doesn't make its way downstream, and it doesn't maintain the wetlands downstream. So the tip of the delta is going to shrink some more as a result. And we have historical examples for that since the Europeans arrived. That's exactly what happened.
So, Gene, I take it that you would oppose that project on balance, at the very least. Is that accurate?
I have written comments to that effect.
Okay.
I think they haven't examined the whole field of consequences.
And Gene, we have a few other people who want to speak from the comments, but on this particular issue of the Barataria, the diversion, I would like to invite Chief Sherrill, Rosina, or Teresa to comment if they like on this particular issue, if you have something to say that would help educate people.
Hi, this is Rosina Philippe from Grand Bayou Village. And we have looked at this proposed project of the diversion that planned implementation into our region. And at the last look that we had in a recent meeting, the turnaround for this project being introduced and the water and the sediment and the, excuse me, the sediment capture in our area it would happen in about 40 years from the time that the project was implemented. So the outfall where this diversion is supposed to be, that's where the immediate gain, I guess, of sediment capture would happen. But in my region, as the water spread out further, as Jean explained, further afield, it would take about 40 years before that we'd see some type of recovery. So we would get 40 years of water before we saw the benefits of this project as far as sediment is concerned. So I would say that, you know, in and of itself, I don't think that we would benefit from it, but if it were to combine, you know, that project with other projects, whether it be closing canals, dredge deposit materials being introduced into the area, you know, other types of projects to go along with this project, I think people need to take a look at that, because we do not have 40 years of more water coming into our system. That you don't have that luxury to just sit back and let that happen. Other things need to happen.
Thank you. And we do have some questions from Anne and Robert in the chat, but before we go to them, I just wanted to invite Chief Sherrill or Teresa if they want to speak to the positive aspects of the canals being filled, if there's anything you would like to say.
Well, I think if we can get monies to fill our canals, it would save our mounds and our wetlands and our fishing industry, because once our wetlands are gone, like it says on the screen, no wetlands, no seafood. And in our community, we're a fishing community, and our people either fish crabs or shrimp, and they do oystering. And the diversion, I think, would bring in more fresh water into our area where it could possibly, or maybe we far enough to where it wouldn't affect our oysters, but fresh water does affect the oysters. So, you know, and that's kind of a industry, and well, it is an industry in our area. Like right now in the winter months, that's what they do. You'll see us fish oysters, go catch oysters, because the crabs aren't biting that much. So.
Thank you, Teresa. And Chief Sherrill, did you want to say anything on this?
No, thank you. Both of our leaders touched on that subject on different aspects so beautifully. You know, the things that have taken place over many, many years, which have brought a lot of damage to not only our area, but it's also really strained our cultural practices. It's endangered our sacred spaces and our lifeways, you know, and us as a people. I don't think that we can just look at one particular proposed project to say, okay, this, you know, this is going to be the fix. You know, because the damage is so diverse, we need to look at a lot of different options, which is why, you know, the canal backfilling is crucial in what we're trying to do. You know, so we're extremely thankful to the Lowlander Center and Dr. Turner, you know, for really listening to us and really keeping an open heart and an open mind and having those expertise available to figure out, you know, what can we do, you know, to really face this situation, not only from a scientific perspective, but also from a perspective of traditional ecological knowledge.
Thank you so much. And I stopped the screen sharing, I realized, so we could see each other a little bit better. We have a few minutes left here, and I would like to thank Anne for waiting patiently. She had a couple questions. Anne, if you'd like to unmute and maybe ask these
Actually,
yourself.
Robert Desmarais Sullivan was before me. If he wanted to ask his questions, mine are written down for anyone to see. And I think that we are all working towards the answer to my questions. What are the variety of options that will actually be useful? And thank you for mentioning that it's not just one thing, but being involved from the outside. My question is, well, so which one do I do? When we share this information out, what do we ask the people that see this to do? It's a hard question. So I'm going to let Dr. Robert ask his. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, since the state uses eminent domain to dig canals like the Bayou Bridge pipeline, it seems to me that eminent domain could be used to refill them, to backfill them. And I was wondering what Dr. Jean thought about a group like ours serving as active lobbyists to revive John Barry's action of several years ago that the Governor Jindal quashed so brutally. I was wondering what he thought of that taking place, of us pushing and supporting John Barry's movement as, in effect, citizen activists.
I don't know so much. I'm from a Pleistocene, as they say. So I've seen a lot, but I'm not very good at predicting. I can say intent is more important than prediction outcomes, at least for a lot of us. Well, for me. All right. So I think trying things differently to accept the difficulties and maybe finding a way around them is one way. Going head to head with them is another way. And I think both happen through time with different, depends what you're good at. And you have to try, and sometimes you do the right thing for the wrong reason and the wrong thing for the right reason. So I don't know the best way to go about this, but I know that one way to go about this is to get landowner permission, landowners, more of them, because they own the land and you have to have their permission to drag their canal down. You need their permission. And to have them be willing for free, have somebody else fill them in is something it's still an obstacle. You know, because it hasn't been asked or because it hasn't happened very often. Occasionally, the 75% of Louisiana's coastal land roughly is owned by private enterprise, and mineral rights go with land rights. So they're very touchy about. They pay a lot of attention to what's going on at the site. It's to their advantage to fill them in, I think. But it may cost $30,000, and they got a lot of them. And of course, there's less producing wells, and the price of oil is less. So they don't want to be tied, I think, in many cases, to a few canals being the damage, because they might be then tied to restore all of them. So one way around it with that is to say to find the money outside, which I don't think is much relative to the other costs of restoring the coast, is have the state basically fill in for the damage they allowed to happen by permitting.
Thank you, Jean. And I see that Sylvia McKenzie has her hand up. I'd like to invite her to unmute and share her question. We do recognize it's 10 o'clock, so if people have to go, we understand. But we'll keep pestering Jean with questions as long as he's willing to answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sylvia McKenzie. I'm part of Justice and Beyond and host of other organizations. I really am glad I'm on this call because I do have history and land in New Orleans. And this is something my father worked in before I was even thought about being brought to this world. But he taught me a lot. And we worked with the Corps of Engineers a good time after Katrina to try to help with the restoration of our levees and stuff and with these canals. We also work closely with the Sealer project that had taken place as well, because the canals at the end of the wire and all of our streets in New Orleans East, they were filled. And we also had to have our pipes that were like the size of a penny where water couldn't pass through had to be restored and made bigger. So we worked closely with the Sealer project, a lot of us homeowners in New Orleans East. So my thing is, when you mention about the mineral rights, and I know it's part of your land rights, it makes me go back to Katrina to know how a lot of people land in the lower Ninth Ward was taken from them. And a lot of our areas in New Orleans East, they wanted to use for green space. But it's education that we need, and it's a way to build the levees and all these other things back. And then Chalmette, where I live, they was to purchase an ecosystem lab that could help filter the water and do everything else. So I've been educating myself with the river for a long time. So I know I have a lot to offer, and I would love to be in more of these to really share with you all, because I've been there and work with you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Peter also had a question. Peter?
Yeah, Dr. Turner, to what extent is diversion necessary if, in fact, there was a robust program of filling all the canals? Would that be in itself sufficient to restore the wetlands?
There are a lot of elements to that question, and the question would be, will diversions have a net gain? Will they cause more land loss than gain? Sea level rise is accelerating. It's getting to the point, in the Gulf of Mexico, sea level rise is twice as fast as the average for the world. And it's getting to the point at which several of us have measured how tolerant plants are of that rise. And in 20 or 30 years, maybe, I don't know, it's maybe longer, it's going to be that the plants can't take that water level rise. So there are lots of elements to answering your question, depending on your assumptions. And it may make no difference at all. If it takes 50 years to get a diversion, to start 40 years or 50 years to start developing land at that immediate area, but all the area around it is gone because of sea level rise, well, that's not very helpful.
No. Yeah, and you said another word, phosphorus. That, talk a little bit about the impact that could have. That's exactly the issue in the Everglades, why they just can't dump a lot more money into them because of all the phosphorus from the sugar farming. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the phosphorus in the Everglades is on top of a calcareous system. It's right on top of old coral reefs. It's pretty much a phosphorus limited system. In our system, if you add more nitrogen, you get more above ground, but you get less below ground because the plant has different needs, and the phytoplankton, the algae need more phosphorus. It's a muddy system, and it has sediments floating around it, and we're just learning about how much phosphorus limits production, you might say, in sediment systems. But it's clearly in the Everglades, it's phosphorus because it's a calcareous system, calcium carbonate system. I'd have to go into a lot of detail about that. And I don't know a lot of it.
Thank you.
Sorry.
But Jean, I think to address Peter's question, the other part of it is that the refilling of the canals now is, even if there is the diversions later down the road, you're still doing the necessary steps in that process of at least saving some of the things now. And if that works totally, then so be it. But maybe address that aspect of it.
Like the title, it's quick, it's relatively inexpensive. I mean, quick, you get 2/3 of it done within a year or two. It's quick. It's inexpensive because the cost is so low relative, especially a diversion. It's done with existing equipment. There's nothing fancy about this. And you can teach people how to do it. And when we did it at the park and a few other places, I can tell you that the dredge operators loved it because they were finally filling something in that they knew was damaging, that they were involved in. And there's plenty of work to do. It's, I don't see a downside of it in that sense. It's quick, inexpensive, available, teachable, and can be done everywhere. And in this case, we have a strong community that wants to do it, that needs to do it, and that can do it and can show everybody else how to do it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think this is probably a good stopping place for us today. Let's have a big round of applause for Gene Turner. Dr. Turner, thank you for speaking with us and for sharing your research and insights. Thank you, everybody, for your participation today. You will find this posted to our website, gnoicc.org, probably after Mardi Gras, once we can get the video processed. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.